Yeah. I remember that. By the way, I'm just gonna start recording so I don't forget because I'm afraid I'm gonna.
Okay.
All right, awesome, perfect. So, Brian, thank you so much for being a part of this project. Thank you so much for donating both your time as well as your wisdom and your talent for us tonight. I really, really appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm
Of
pretty
course.
sure I can hopefully answer some questions, hopefully make a few awkward jokes, the standard stuff.
The cringe jokes are my job. That's why I'm
All
here.
right.
So don't steal my thunder. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you've been involved in improv for several years, but I would love to know just kind of a little bit more about who you are, what you're about, and primarily what made you get started in improv in the first place.
So I guess I can just start. I've been born and raised in Chicago, so obviously that's an improv city. No matter where you go, you always find improv wherever, which I guess helps out because I grew up in Wrigleyville. So, you grew up close to IO, you grew up to like all the big places nearby. I also like, I've always been a fan of improv, but I never really made the jump till I was older because I used to always watch Whose Line Is It Anyway? So I feel like that was like a big door opener for wanting to do comedy because ultimately I always felt like I was kind of too mature for kids my age.
Dude, Whose Line is like the pinnacle of comedy on television. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I remember vividly, like kids were like, "Hey, did you watch wrestling?" I'm like, "No, that's the same night as Whose Line."
Yeah.
They're like, "What's Whose Line?" Comedy. Wayne Brady, and they're like, "Who the hell is Wayne Brady?" Of course, nowadays everyone knows who Wayne Brady is.
Everybody knows, right?
But yeah, so I grew up there watching comedy on TV, and then when I was older, a friend of mine, to get out of his forced habit of being shy and I guess awkward. I mean, he's still awkward, so it didn't really help.
I
But
was gonna say I've never seen comedy fix anybody being awkward.
yeah, yeah, he decided to take classes at Second City. He's like, "Oh man, this is great. You would love this." Considering by that point I was always going to shows regularly,
Yeah. Second
and
City. Who goes
yeah, I'm
there?
like, "Oh man, it sounds like pretty uptight and pretentious." And then at the time, he's like, "Okay, I'll give you a gift card, so you have to take it." So I did. I mean, little do you know, I could have flipped that gift card for money. Like, people know their ways. And I guess I was hooked on performing improv from then on out.
Man,
Although
that's
now
quite
I
the
guess it's
leap.
evolved to like stand up too. So,
Yeah, I was
and
gonna say
opened the
because
door
like
for me.
from what I know about you, you went from literally just being like a normal dude to doing improv, and that is a leap. Like that, most people, I feel like they kind of take baby steps. They try drama or something first. So I think that's really amazing that you went from just being like kind of normal to
Yeah. I mean, I had like experience, like I took like acting classes when I was younger, and
right, but
I dabbled
still.
in like filmmaking like classes over the summer when I was younger too.
Right.
And
To go from that to being like, I'm on stage and I literally have no script and the audience is going to tell me what to say and they could be drunk. Who knows what they're going to say? Like, that's amazing. That's awesome.
yeah, I mean, I also grew up in Wrigleyville, so I'm like, anyone could be drunk.
Oh, that's true. That's true. See, I forget, even though you did say like you were born and raised in Chicago, I'm used to coming from like the mental perspective of someone who didn't grow up there and
Yeah.
move there. Like, even though I was young, I still had the culture shock, but you're used to it. You're like, oh no, I'm
Yeah.
from Wrigleyville. Like, drunk is
I mean,
all
there's that like culture shock people have when they like first move to Chicago. And then for me, I'm like, no, it's always been like this.
your
Like,
culture shock was meeting your first sober person, probably.
yeah. Like, just talking to someone normally. Like, I remember like outside where IO used to be, like frequently that was like a shady looking area because I remember being like
Yeah.
6 or 7 and then someone's like, can I like buy some cocaine off you?
Yep.
I'm like,
Yep.
dude, I'm 6.
Yeah.
Do I have
Yeah.
cocaine? No, but my mom's right here, so ask me later type
Yeah.
stuff.
And now it's like a Harley Davidson store.
Yeah.
And you're like, how? I remember how sketchy this place. I got kicked out of a Starbucks around the corner from that IO once because it was really dangerous and sketchy outside, but they were closing, and I was like, "Please, let me stay in
Oh
here."
yeah, no, they were hard. They're like, you go out and you deal full of crazies.
Yep. Which I don't blame them because now there were probably people like pimping each other out in the bathroom and stuff. But Those were the
Yeah,
days. Those were the good
those
days.
were the days.
That's back when improv was like peak. So what was your first improv experience like in terms of the show? You know, when you were performing your first improv show, was it scary? Did it go well? Did it flop? What was that like?
So I will say my improv experience has been kind of different because I went through the Second City program, so it's A through E.
Right,
Obviously, they work you up to a show. I
right.
believe you do a show.
I
I
think level
think it's
C
level
is
C is when you start doing a
think so.
show. But by then, I had already done a few.
Yeah. Oh, like independently?
Yeah, so I had already kind of jumped in before on my own. I would say my first proper improv show was probably doing the pillow fight for Second City.
I remember that. Didn't I know you at that point? Or did I meet you like very soon after
You
that?
met me, I think, soon after.
Yeah, because you were, or maybe, or did you do it a bunch of times? Maybe.
I did it a bunch of times.
That's probably why that you probably were
Well,
on.
actually, I only officially did it once, but my team won, so we kept doing it repeatedly.
Yes,
So we
that's
were
right.
part of like a long chain because we had to go through to the end.
Right. So
But
at
yeah,
what point when you were in improv, you know, A, B, C, D, did you kind of say like, "Oh, I'm good at this," and then what made you pursue outside shows? Because it sounds like you were well on your way before the class shows even happened, which is remarkable because I know that A through E happens in less than a year.
yeah. My experience is actually different because I took level A,
Hmm.
and then I didn't feel like I meshed entirely with my classmates. But it was also a case of the job I was working at the time. I had to be really picky with my schedule because I had to go straight to work because I worked as a concierge for a retail store. So it's like Saturday mornings, they really want you there.
Yeah,
So I had a morning class, and
that's
then
like
like right
peak
after,
for like retail or any kind of job like
yeah,
that.
and it was horrible because I'm like in a suit and tie, and I'm like trying to do improv, and I think everyone thought I was like a mobster or like a bodyguard. But then I'm also trying not to do really intensive stuff because I don't want to ruin my suit.
Right.
But
So,
I took A, and then I just took a break because I'm like, well, I don't feel right taking this away from my coworkers who are like putting up with me doing this. And I mean, I met some cool people, but it wasn't people that I really gelled with. But fast forward, I think a couple of years to my current job, and they were far more lenient, paid me better, gave me like a set schedule. I'm like, you know what, let me try this again. And that's where I made like a bunch of friends, and I met some really great people, and it just kind of clicked for me from there.
wow. So, when you took the break from improv, did you think that was kind of it for you? Or did you think I'll return to this later? Like, how serious were you at that point? Like, how soon in the process did you realize this is something that I really want to do and this is something that I really want to get good at?
Because at the first time, I kind of feel like, oh, I'm all right at it.
Hmm.
But I think I've always had the problem with, I think that I started off like I fully knew the fundamentals. So I had seen so many improv shows at that point. I was going to improv shows like maybe once or twice a week for consistently. So I've like
Performing or watching or?
watching.
Okay.
And I kind of felt like that's where I got a lot of skill. But then I was always in my own head, like, oh, I don't know how good I am. I don't think I'm great. And then I'm like, oh, well, I had other like weird personal stuff going on too, where I'm like, oh, I'll do it later. But then later became like a year, and I'm like, okay, I don't think I'm going back to it.
Wow.
But it wasn't until like later when it opened up that I'm like, okay, let me give it a try. I met some like cool people, and then I was getting good feedback. But then I'm like, okay, you know what? Let me give this a try with like a pillow fight.
Yeah. Tell
Because
us what pillow fight is for anybody who may
so
not know
for
what that
those who
is.
don't know, Second City used to, well, I guess who knows? Hopefully they come back. But they used to run something called the Pillow Fight, which was kind of like a miniature competition where they would have these improv teams perform. I believe you got like 10 minutes, and you would compete against about three other teams that night. And the winner would move on to the next round, and then it would kind of go like a tournament style. with the final night being like the top 4 teams, and the winning team would get either a workshop with an instructor of their choice for
Wow.
free or a show run at Second City.
Wow. Whoa. I'm curious who would pick the workshop over the show run. I don't know.
You'd
Like
be surprised. I spoke to a lot of people, and almost everyone went with the workshop,
really?
probably because I guess people were really kind of nervous about doing the whole show.
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. And also
Um,
like
yeah.
as somebody who taught at Second City, maybe that's just my brain being like, I'm a piece of shit. Why would you pick a show? Why wouldn't you pick the show over like hanging out with me for 3 hours? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, had you been teaching improv, I would have been like, yeah, let's just hang out with Sydney for 3 hours.
No, had I been teaching improv, you would have been like, show please. Show please. I'm done
No,
with this.
so I was like discussing it with like my group because initially we kind of went in, I want to say a little underexperienced, because outside of myself, who, I mean, I've seen so much improv that I can say that I can tell what's right, what's wrong, and I'm kind of just translating it in my head.
Yeah.
A lot of us, the most experience we had was level B.
Right, right. And so
So
tell
you're
us a
learning the
little,
fundamentals of character stuff. Yeah.
yeah, tell us a little bit. I mean, you don't have to go through like the entire Rolodex, but for people who maybe are watching this and are completely unfamiliar with improv, or their only experience to improv was Whose Line Is It Anyway? What are, if you could tell past you, or if you were to say run like a workshop, what would be maybe the top 3 most important things people should know about improv when they begin performing? Whether it's rules, fundamentals, audience related stuff, behavior related stuff, what would you
Uh,
say?
I will say first and foremost, probably the biggest like takeaway is it's a lot harder than it appears to be. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe it's just the whole like improv so ingrained with drunk people that drunk people be like, yeah, I can totally do that on stage.
Yeah.
Then you see so many people come on and then they drop out because they freeze in that moment.
Right. Or they drop out because they're not like the best immediately.
Yeah, like you find a lot of people with those egos and all that. Like I will say probably that's the big takeaway I took, but there's other ones such as if you're gonna perform, it helps to kind of be open-minded with your suggestions, because everyone has the idea that, oh, I got this suggestion, I want to go in this direction with it.
Yeah.
But you have to remember that you're also performing with like at least one other person, most likely.
Right.
And obviously
Hopefully.
that person is going to be like maybe pursuing their own idea. And while it might hurt you to do that, that's part of what makes it fun, because you're going to be combining your 2 ideas into that. So I would say not being afraid of kind of compromising with your partner.
Mhm.
That's another big takeaway I took. Then I will say starting off, probably just not getting into your own head, because everyone, like for me personally, I will say I'm my harshest critic. So that's
I
something
know
that I
you are your
struggled with.
harshest critic.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah,
seen
you
it.
know me from stand up where I'm like,
Yep.
oh man, I did horrible. And you're like, no, people loved it. I'm
I'm
like,
like, what are you
no,
talking about?
no, I hated it. That's the important part.
Yeah, yeah. I think I remember I saw you after your first stand-up show and we were like doing notes or something like that. And I was like, and you hated yours. I could tell. You just hated it. I could tell immediately. And you were like, yeah, I did. How'd you know? I was like, because you're
Yeah,
a
I know. I felt
comedian,
like the
not an
floodgates just
actor.
opened. I'm like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
it was awful. Yeah,
So, oh, sorry.
that's important. Oh no, sorry. I was just gonna say, yeah, that's one thing I first noticed with improv, is because you obviously for instance, I would get in my head about like doing the scene where I'm like, oh, I didn't convey a message properly, or I didn't like react accordingly, or I was forced to go this way. But
Mhm.
I think if you tie it with the previous thing I mentioned about letting it go, it just makes it a lot easier for you, especially
Right.
starting out. The sooner you can accept it, the easier it is.
That's awesome. That's a really good message. The sooner you can accept it, the easier it is. Um, so I really like what you said about not trying to like force things, right? About not trying to take ideas and force them to go in a certain direction and compromising with your partner. I really like what you said about that, because I think a lot of people get into comedy wanting to be the star and wanting to be the funny one and wanting to be the crazy one. And with something like improv, where it is all about the ensemble, it is 100% about the ensemble. I feel like there is an ego in comedians, even great ones like me. There's an ego in comics where we want to be the center of attention, and I think it's really important what you said about compromising with your partner. Now, that being said, say for example, I wake up tomorrow and I want to do improv. Pretend that I have not done comedy before, or maybe I've taken a class before, you know, because I got like a gift certificate or something. How important is it when I am selecting my team members? How important is that aspect of improv, the whole who you are with, and how you formulate a team? And then also, when you were doing the shows, the pillow fights, were you with
Yeah.
your classmates, or were you with people that you had selected who had like kind of curated your own improv team? How important is that? Basically, can you work really well with a team that was put together for you, or do you have to pick them? And then how important is it when you're picking like from your friends, I guess?
Okay. Yeah, I can actually totally go into this because I actually had this exact same issue. So initially, so Pillow Fight has a rule where you need to have at least 8 members.
Wow, that's so
So,
many.
which is really annoying for an ensemble. So, my
That's
team,
so many
big
people.
big time randos, we actually run about like 10 members. So we're like a pretty large improv group, but we make it work. But when I started off initially, I started off choosing the people who in my level B class, I got along with like on a personal level. B, whenever we performed scenes, I felt like you had that comfort level of, hey, I'm not being like, held at gunpoint to sort of push my ideas down. They're willing to yes and it. And C, just, I want to say their comedy style blends pretty well because as you mentioned earlier with the ego, you see that a lot in Second City, probably every other improv thing like I've taken. You see early on who clearly has that ego,
Right,
as well as who has that ego and can control it,
right,
and who honestly probably doesn't even have an ego. And you can tell
right,
those people are going to go far and they're really easy to perform with. So I really aimed for people who I knew wouldn't clash
right.
with like my vision for the group, because to be honest, I only formed a group because I'm like, hey, let's try it, get some extra, reps in for improv.
Hmm.
Again, for people who don't know, improv reps, like improv sets and like performing, not like, we're all working out in like a sweaty gym.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all
Gains.
getting ripped. Got to get those gains, and never skip leg day.
That made me laugh
But
way
yeah,
harder than.
so like with my group, I initially recruited exclusively from my level B class, just from its people I knew firsthand. And to round it out, I actually brought in my friend who introduced me to improv, which honestly was a lot harder simply because while I can vouch for him, no one else could have. Because
Yeah,
like they
that's
hadn't seen him
interesting.
perform, they hadn't like known him, because it's like I even like admitted to him, I'm sorry I threw you to the wolves later on, where I'm like, I brought you into a bunch of strangers who you don't really know.
Yeah, who had already formulated a specific relationship that he or
Yeah.
she was not
Because by that
privy
point
to.
he was already like, level E. So I'm like, okay, let's like, I
Wow.
can totally get him to like, give us some pointers and things like that, help round us out, because
Yeah.
Pillow Fight doesn't have like a level restriction.
Right. And meanwhile, the group is probably like, who's this guy who keeps telling us what to do?
Yeah, pretty much all they really know him was like, oh yeah, he's like Brian's best friend, and they have this weird mind meld thing.
Yeah. And now we have to like listen to him, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
like
So
interesting.
so he came in, I mean, I gotta say initially there was like probably a bit of a hurdle, but we actually got past it simply because, I mean, people, as a lot of improv is like, you have to keep performing with the same people. It's
Right.
kind of like exercise. As soon as you perform with them, you'll get to know their quirks, their ideas, what they like to go for.
Right.
Like I have a member who we always give him the dad character.
Does he hate that or is he
He
cool with that?
hates it,
Yeah.
but
Because I know,
I think deep down he loves it.
right. So, like women, I know women who improvise. I've heard nonstop hate being typecast. They're like, I always get the mom, I always get the whatever, like I always get the daughter, the sister. So I was curious if it's the same way with guys or not.
I mean, for us, it's kind of like that. He, as the oldest member, just gets it, even though he's not that much older than us.
Right.
Um,
But he's old
Awkwardly, I feel
enough.
like, yeah, he's old enough that we can pull it off because he just happens to look the part. Like he
Right,
looks
right.
like a big brother dad figure. Awkwardly enough, my group usually does well with subverting like the typecast. Like no one would really know that I usually wind up playing like mother figures and like scenes.
I feel like I would know that. I feel like I would peg
Yeah,
that. But
yeah,
that's
you
just
would
because I know
probably
you.
figure it out. Like people who know me were like, yeah, that seems like him. They're like,
That seems
or
like
it just seems, the big, tall, 6'3" guy, like just being like really motherly in the scene and just
it's
like
really
endearing.
funny.
I mean,
Um,
you just kind of roll with it, and what usually pops up. And like for
yes,
us, it's
and
like we have those roles that we were used to.
yeah, yeah. And for anyone who's watching this and doesn't is unfamiliar with yes and, basically that is probably like the number one most important thing you'll learn in improv is yes and that basically means when you're presented with an idea, you run with it. So if somebody says in a scene, "Oh man, I love this bag of oranges that I've got," even if you think it is the literal worst idea you've ever heard, or even if you think that in that moment they just ruined the scene, you're like, yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought the bag of oranges. No, this is not streaming anywhere outside of Zoom, but it will be on YouTube. So that's why I keep referencing. We got a question in the chat. That's why I keep referencing like anybody who's watching this. Um, so yeah, for anybody who's unsure with what yes and means. Now, Brian, so when I was younger, when I was like 21, I did the A through E program. I knew that I didn't want to do improv with my whole life. I actually started in improv in high school and then was pushed into stand up and loved stand up so much I kept doing it. But I did the improv A through E program because I wanted that certificate. I wanted to say it's kind of like the graduate school diploma of comedy. Even if you don't want to do improv, even if you want to be a writer or do sketch or do stand up, you need that diploma that says you went through improv. And I personally genuinely feel like the skills that I learned in improv have stayed with me um more like I think feel like they've been more useful than probably any other kind of training I've ever had, right? And I've been a debater, I went to college, I've been a writer. What would you say, what kind of skills would you say you maybe have picked up from improv that you have either taken with you through real life, like outside of comedy, have helped you in other aspects of comedy? Do you think that your foundation in improv has been advantageous for you?
I actually feel like it's been super beneficial, not just the whole, just being used to being quicker on your feet. Because unlike, stand
Yeah.
up, you don't write your material. You usually have to be spontaneous, quicker witted on your,
Yes.
because you're not going to have that time to come up with something. But just simply rolling with the punches, like a weird scenario of like, for me, like shortly after I did improv, I got put into like a managerial role at my job. And now it's like, oh no, there's this weird error or this issue that pops up. And for me, I'm like, okay, what can I do with it? Here I go. And it's actually helped me in interacting with other people because it kind of overcomes a lot of shyness I have, because now at least it makes me pretend I'm confident and like
Right.
well adjusted.
Yeah.
And that's probably the greatest skill set of all. You can pretend to be whatever you're not.
Yeah, I feel like improv made me a better debater and speaker, made me a better teacher, even though I wasn't even teaching improv. It made me a better stand-up comic because, like you said, you think on your feet, right? It gives you that kind of like cat-like skill to land no matter what is thrown at you or where you're thrown off of. Um, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of skill there that are very important in improv because I've been talking about stand-up and how I didn't do improv or anything like that afterward, but I didn't want people to think I was like shitting on improv. I wanted them to know, like, I personally feel like my foundation with improv was very, very important and very beneficial. And I was just curious if you felt the same way in
Well,
terms
I
of,
fully agree. I actually think that like it's really important to at least, maybe if you don't even consider pursuing it as like a, I guess, a job or even like a hobby,
right.
just taking a few improv classes might at least help you kind of discover stuff about yourself,
Yeah.
readjust yourself to like a new mindset kind
Right,
of.
right, and corporate America has started figuring that out. I was reading, I think on LinkedIn somewhere, it was either on LinkedIn or CNN, that companies are starting to really put value when they get resumes applying for jobs that have improv, that have storytelling, that have comedy classes and drama classes. They're starting to weigh a lot more in terms of whether or not you get hired, because they recognize that these skills are actually very beneficial, especially if you're going into law or if you're going into PR. They look at your background in improv and they're like, where 10 years ago, they'd be like, oh, that sounds like fun. I guess you took drama classes or something like that. Now they're actually starting to pay their employees to go take improv classes and pay these companies like Second City to come in and do like corporate training. So I'm glad that you mentioned, like, even if you're not trying to do improv full time, or even if you're not trying to be a comedian, how important this can be. Um, Now, I'm going to segue kind of into COVID related questions. But before I do that, I wanted to give our audience here on Zoom the opportunity to ask any questions that they might have before I segue more into like the modern day, like Zoom COVID type questions. Did any of you have questions for Brian that you wanted to ask? All right, we got some in the chat. Bilal, hit us with it. What is the most challenging part of improv? I really like that question a lot.
Oh, I don't even see the questions at all, but that's great. You do.
Yeah, yeah. I've always wondered, I've always wondered if anybody else can see that stuff. I wasn't sure.
Okay. The most challenging part of improv for me, I gotta say, a lot of it is just always going out on stage, because you always have that sheer fear of, will something go wrong? Because it's not like anything else. You can't have a script. You're always at the whim of the audience. So every
Yeah.
time you go on, you're either going to get accountant or lawyer or doctor or one of
Or
a
a
million
drunk.
other jobs, or a drunk who will interject themselves. But for me, it always goes away after a little while, because once you're with a good team that you enjoy and like people you can trust, you'll be fine. So that a lot of that fear will be gone. I guess part of my problem is like I'm also kind of a perfectionist, so I always want everything to go as well as it could.
I'm a
But
perfectionist, so I'm going to do the one art form that I'm not allowed to prepare for in advance.
exactly. I mean, it's horrible irony, but for me, it was always like getting on stage and just wanting to make sure I can get everyone on stage, I can get everyone off stage at the right time, I could get enough laughs in that people felt like the show was worth coming to, and just ultimately having a good time for my team and just making sure we all get off stage and don't hate each other.
Yeah, yeah. And then we had another question, a post in the chat. Do you think that your foundation with improv, and your skills that you've learned in improv have made you a better stand-up comedian?
I actually feel like they do, and I'm sure Sydney can probably attest to that.
Yeah, no, for
Because I,
sure.
I I have the problem with like sometimes like I'll go through and then I'm like, crap, I forget where to go, and then I'll just like off the cuff come up with a joke, or I'll just make up sets, because there's been a couple of times I'm performing and I'm like
Yeah,
halfway in the middle of it, I'm like, I don't like what I'm doing. I'm just gonna come up with something different.
yeah,
And I'm just like randomly monologuing a bunch of jokes and stuff that happened to me.
yeah, yeah.
And I
And
feel like a lot of it's like the basis of my material too, where like I can just come up with something based on improvising stuff, like just things that I've seen, witnessed, and then from there it kind of like the magic starts flowing, and you immediately start drawing these like connections to things that just makes it easier to perform, like, and tell people about it.
right, right. And I tell people, as somebody who did improv first and then stand-up second, I think, one, like you said, the skills are just really beneficial. Just thinking off the top of your head, just having kind of those skills are really beneficial. But also, to me, in my mind, I'm like, at least with stand up, if I screw it up, I only screw it up for one person, and that's me. You know, like with improv, if I screw it up, I've screwed it up for a whole team of people who worked really hard and practiced long hours and showed up prepared, right? And like did everything they needed to do correctly. And I screwed it up. At least with stand up, I one, get to take my notes. And two, if it totally tanks, I only did it for me, right? So that like I feel like
Yeah.
there's two benefits there, right? There's one, the skills, and two, you know, at least you can go into stand up feeling a little bit of relief because you don't have to worry about suggestions from people who are just like dicks. Because that's all I've ever run into when I do improv is like drunk people wanting to
Yeah,
be
I
like
mean, it's
dicks.
surprisingly common. I mean, after a while, sometimes like you can learn to like drown those out.
Oh yeah, totally. No, you like there will be one person who yells dicks and other people who yell good ideas, and you're just like, ah, I heard cabinet. Yes, here we go.
Yeah.
So that's good. It's not, you know, there's you don't have to say what they tell you to say. Let's see here. We have some more questions. Let's see. Since SNL only has a few spots available, what is the career goal for improv actors? For example, with stand up comedians, the end goal could be a career as a stand up comedian. However, improv is not known as a touring career, at least with what this person knows. What is the best and worst improv advice you ever received? So, sorry, that was two questions.
Oh,
So,
okay.
sorry, I meant to separate those. So, you know, stand up, SNL has very limited spots. What else is there to do as a professional improviser? And then what is the best and worst improv advice you've ever received?
So for the first part, I kind of feel like one of the big problems of improv is that SNL is always viewed as like the end goal,
The
like the
pinnacle.
mecca that you have to kind of strive for. And I'll be honest, SNL isn't entirely as improvised as people like it to be. It's heavily focused on writing and
Sketch.
sketch, and my team doesn't really perform sketch. We've tried it and we dabble with it here and there every so often, but for the most part we just kind of like performing improv because it just feels more natural, like a reactionary performance. And from there you kind of feel more in your zone, because I know plenty of people who are like they got into improv because they want to reach SNL, but for me that's not like my end goal. For me, I kind of feel like, well, at least pre-COVID, I mean, the post-COVID stuff we can talk about later, but pre-COVID for me it's like just getting booked around town was just like that was my goal, like having a consistent schedule of we could make whenever we wanted to perform. Like that was like my career goal was, hey, I can anytime I can reach out to someone, hey, are you looking to book something, or my team is interested, and then just reaching out to someone, be like, oh yeah, come on down, we know you guys are great, we love having you again, and just be given a slot pretty much at our beck and call almost. So I feel like at
Becoming
least
kind
for
of like
now.
not locally famous, but like good enough that like every theater in the city, or at least a lot of theaters in the city, are willing to give you a spot because your reputation.
Yeah, exactly. I also feel like if you're going to go into improv to try and turn it into a career, you really shouldn't. I mean, it sounds like,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
I
I
don't want to
get
like dissuade someone, but
you.
it's a skill set that if you do want to make it like a professional career, you have to combine with something else. Like you have to
You
combine it
literally
with
have to be
stand
on
up.
whose line.
Yeah, combine it with writing and combine it with acting. Like the skills will be really beneficial if you're going down any of those other routes.
Right.
But
Right.
when it comes to just strictly improv by itself, it's a little limited. But as long as you go in kind of knowing what you want to do with it, because a lot of it is like, for me, it was stuff that I kind of figured out on my own. Like, it wasn't until I started performing with my own team that I'm like, okay, there's all these doors opening up. There's all these things my team can do. There's all these places we can go if we want to. We're just kind of limited by, well, first off, jobs and family, but also like what we want to choose to do. Like, the world is kind of like your oyster. And particularly here in Chicago, it's like you're never going to be missing out on any opportunities because there's just so many. You just have to, rub a little elbow grease into it and show off what you can do.
Right, right, right. And
And
I
yeah,
would argue it's the same with all arts. I tell people all the time, if you go into stand up looking to make money doing only stand up, you're not going to make a lot of money. And the same with improv. If you go into improv looking to make money only being an improviser, you're not going to make a lot of money. But if you can make a lot of money doing comedy, right? So the more diversified your portfolio, I suppose we would say, the better. For example, if you look at famous stand-up comedians, a lot of them also have a sitcom, also did some movies and some acting, also have a podcast, also have a YouTube channel. So it's not at all that comedy will not get you a career or comedy will not make you money. It's that stand-up and improv are your steps on your way to building your brand and building your persona and getting your skills to then do other things, right?
yeah,
So, yeah, so like in case anything that I said or anything that you said made it sound like, oh, like you can't do that. You can,
yeah, no,
but yeah, no, and I didn't think you came across that way. I
yeah,
just
no,
always clarify this with my classes, so I
yeah.
wanted to make sure I clarified it to whoever on YouTube is watching and the
Yeah, I
people
don't
who are
want to
listening.
scare anyone off and be like, hey,
No, no, no. Yeah,
don't go
it's
into improv, but just think of it kind of like you want to be a Swiss Army knife.
right. That's a really good way to put it. Right. Because again, I probably did stand up for 9 years before I ever made money in anything related to comedy. But as a comedian, you do stand up, you do improv, you start writing, right? You start writing for things that pay, you start writing for things that get ad revenue, right? You start doing podcasts that maybe are paid spots or have sponsors or have advertising. You start doing small paid shows like $20 here, $20 there, and that's a lot. I remember the very first time I ever made $20 doing stand up, the cab home cost me $22. Um, and then one day I made enough money to buy a cab home and then also buy a pizza. But you want to be as diversified as possible. That's why you don't really see a lot of millionaires who only do stand up and millionaires who only do improv. Like even Jerry Seinfeld, right? He's not rich because of stand up. He's rich because stand up led to an opportunity to do a show which made him famous, right? So because people argue that all the time. They're like, Jerry Seinfeld's a famous comedian. Right. But he wouldn't be famous if he was only a stand-up comedian. Same with Louis C.K. Louis C.K. was pretty well known, but then he got his show, right?
Yeah,
And then he became so then these people toured doing comedy and making a lot of money after that other venture, right? And we would not know Wayne Brady, we would not know any of those gentlemen who we love so much from Whose Line Is It Anyway if improv hadn't then led to a show with a broader audience with
yeah,
ad revenue. So it's not that we're saying don't do comedy and don't do stand up, you're never ever going to it's never going to lead anywhere. Those are just the first steps that don't pay very much at all that then lead to other comedic opportunities which then pay more, right? Because of stand up I make money on Amazon. Because of stand up I can teach comedy classes and make money doing that. Like because of stand up, because that platform gave me what I needed to build my brand, and because improv and stand up have given you what you needed to build your brand, then you can go out and also do comedy related things that then make money. Or your team can then, because they know you from your other projects and your other ventures, can then go and make more money doing improv thanks to other things that you kind of broadened your scope towards, I guess, to get off my soapbox for a second. Um, and then, oh, okay, kind of in the exact same vein, we have the question here. Why do you think that is that improv isn't sustainable, or why is it so
um,
niche? I
so
wouldn't
let
say
me,
it's not
well, I
sustainable.
was going to bounce back to the other part of the question, which is what is the best advice you got and the
Mm,
worst advice, just
yes.
so I don't feel like we're skipping anything.
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that because I went off on a tangent.
So the best advice for me was my level C teacher in Second City basically told me basically the best part about comedy that it's found in the mundane. So
Yes.
sometimes you'll do a scene and maybe you're not the funny guy, but you're the straight man, and ultimately that is what's going to lead to the funny moment
Yes.
because there's
Oh, that's
humor
so
and
important.
relatability. Like,
That's
sure,
so
everyone wants
important.
to do a scene where you're just like an astronaut who's trying to, take their date to prom, but that's like, sure, there's humor in that, but that's kind of absurdist, and there's something a little bit more telling if you can just do a scene about an awkward teenager taking his date to prom and having to deal with like her really awkward parents, because
Yeah.
a lot of people can relate to that. Hey, I went through that myself, or oh, I remember that, because bringing up those cringy memories or relatable moments.
Right.
And I think that's what kind of can separate most improvisers from just people who want to dabble in it, because some of the best characters are generally characters that either are part of you or that you can really relate to. And I think that goes both ways for the audience. Like if you can connect to what someone is portraying, then you're going to enjoy that scene a lot more, as opposed to just whatever scene about dicks that people shout out on stage.
Right. And I think also we have a lot of us in the performing arts have seen that duo or that group who typically it's beginners. Typically it's like at level 1 shows or student showcases where they clearly did not establish beforehand who was going to be the kooky crazy one. So you've got all these personalities that are trying to take over the scene and trying to be the funny one. And I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. There is a skill in knowing when to step back, and there's a skill in knowing when to not be the quote unquote funny, crazy one in the improv scene. And I think it goes back to a little bit what we said about the types of the types of narcissism in comedy. There's the beginner narcissist who's like, I'm gonna be the funniest one, and I'm gonna be the funniest one in all these scenes, and then they try to force it to happen. And then there's the one who's been doing it for so long that they're like, I'm so amazing, I'm actually just gonna like sit back and let my partners shine, right? But there's also a skill there when you're like, I am comfortable in my abilities as an improviser, so I'll sit this one out. So I will be the boring cashier. I will be the old man on the bench, right? I don't have to be the star of this scene. And I think that's like a talent and an ability that is helpful both in improv, but also in real life to be like, you know what? I'm not going to steal the spotlight here.
Yeah, and I think that's the like best part, because in a way, by not stealing the spotlight, you can actually help your partners in the scene shine.
Right.
Like there's been plenty of scenes I've done where I'm just a boring character, where I like I think we talked about it earlier, where I was like playing like a mother figure, and
Yep.
I'm just like serving people lemonade.
Right.
And then it later evolved into me just being a background character, to just me using lemonade to kind of cover up any family problems, like, oh, shut up and take some lemonade.
Yeah.
Just
Like,
using it to kind of get everyone to like be happy, because I'm secretly, falling apart on the inside
yeah,
and
the mom's like
feeling
having a
broken.
breakdown.
Yeah. So in a way, even if you're the boring character, there's ways to make it fun, but usually you just have to be patient. You just have to know to be the person who is willing to kind of acquiesce and know that your time will come. It might just take a minute or two.
Yeah. I love that. Your time will come. It might just take a minute or two because it will. Somebody says that they have to step away. Dan
Oh,
says, fun conversation, has to walk away for the night. But thank you.
oh yeah. Thank you for saying.
Yeah.
I do want to answer like his other question, or his 2 questions, so it doesn't
Um,
feel like he'll miss out.
yeah. So what was the worst?
Oh, worst advice.
Yeah.
The best one I can think of, or the worst one rather I can think of, would
The
be,
best worst one.
yeah, would be, you can't portray a character of the other gender.
Somebody said that?
Yeah, I actually had an instructor at Second
Standard.
City who was like really reinforcing that idea. She actually did get really mad at me because I was portraying someone's, again, with the mother figure. I was portraying someone's like mom, and she got really upset with me. Even
Weird.
though for me, my stance is, as long as you're not punching down,
Yeah.
it's totally fine. Like,
Yeah. As long as you're not like, I'm an idiot because I'm a woman, but because women are so stupid.
exactly. Like for me and my team, a lot of our best scenes are people of average intelligence just having like a normal moment. So it's like, yeah, sure, you're like portraying a kid, but you're a kid who can talk normally.
Right.
Like you're not pulling off that like childish high pitched accent, or you're just
Interesting.
playing like someone's mom who's like really annoyed with her kid. I feel like you can draw on your own experiences and still kind of pay almost like homage to that character. You're not
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. There's a big difference between homage and making fun of.
yeah, like it's not like a caricature. And I feel like maybe she thought that people were just going to do that simply because there's always like, the problem is like too when you're taking like second city classes, like there's always people who their agenda is to be the character
Right.
who will be number one on the scene, and normally they
Right.
drop off. But I'm pretty sure it's every improv class, like other ones I've taken, to have that same type
Sure.
of
Yeah.
person who they want
We
to be
just
the
have like
star.
hundreds of them. You know
Yeah,
what I
and
mean? Like,
normally they do drop off, but every so often they stick around. And I do think those people, by all means, usually will use that to punch down. But ultimately, I think anyone can portray anything as long as you're respectful. And again, to what I say, like my personal mantra is to just find humor and the relatability and just the everyday.
yeah.
Because I think you could just totally do a scene where you're playing the opposite gender, you're playing someone who's like a different like orientation, a different belief of you, and not be offended. Like I have a coworker who loves coming to my shows because he's like feels like nothing's off limits, but it also feels like you're not purposefully stabbing at someone. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's been
Absolutely.
scenes where like I'm playing a gay person and he's gay, but he knows that I'm not doing the excessive flamboyantness that people do.
Right.
A lot of it's just like a casual, oh, my boyfriend so and so, and then
Yeah.
you're just carrying on the scene like normal. It's kind of like a normal conversation where these minute details don't matter, but they just set
Right.
up the background.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, oh, look at me, this is my scene, I'm so gay. And then also like, hey, honey, look at this. And then another man comes up and he's like, yes, husband. Like that sort of thing where you're like,
Yeah,
oh, you find
exactly.
out.
You're like,
Um,
oh, it's just a minor detail. It's just like married couple.
yeah, and I wonder if the response from that individual, I don't know who they are. I know I've mentioned in this video that I work at Second City, but I'm stand-up writing. I know hardly any of the people who teach improv unless I had them myself as a teacher. I wonder if their response was a little bit, I hate to use the word triggered because I think the word triggered is kind of like abused and used negatively, but I wonder if they had the response that they did. Do you think it had more to do with women's presence in improv or lack thereof? Let's talk about that just for kind of like a minute. Do you
Yeah,
think
sure.
maybe because they were a female authority figure in improv and if we're being honest, that really does not happen often. Do you think maybe they kind of saw it as an opportunity for a female improviser that was taken away from them?
I was thinking that because I mean, so it was a female instructor, and
Yeah.
it was obviously like a big thing for her that actually particularly the big reason why my group that took that level with me, we absolutely hated that level
Oh no.
because we found it like really incredibly stifling because
The agenda was there.
the agenda, because I feel like no, there isn't an agenda unless you force one on it.
Right.
And I felt like with her, a lot of the scenes that we were doing were really forced to be like, oh, well, so and so might be interpreted this way.
Right.
And in reality, it might not unless you're already coming to look that for that.
And taking away a man's ability to portray a woman in a scene is literally taking away the fundamental yes and aspect of improv, right? Um, which to me, like again, I didn't teach improv, but I know even I know that. You know what I'm saying? Like even
Yeah.
I know you yes and if somebody says you're a woman for this scene, you're a woman for this scene. It would be different if they were like, we are casting women for improv, and you show up and you're like, actually, I'm really good at playing women, and they're like, oh, thank God, because we didn't want to hire any women. You know what I mean? Like if
Yeah. I mean,
that's
it's also like weirdly, I guess, strange with my group because we found it a little offensive because for us, our rule was basically you can play either gender. Like we have female
Right.
members on my team,
Yeah.
and they can play whatever character they feel like, simply because ultimately that's their interpretation. Like I
Right.
will say, like one of our members, she's great at playing like a really dominant male
Right.
personality,
Right.
and it's
I've
one of
been
her
that character
strengths.
too. Right. I've played a
Yeah,
dad before.
yeah, and while myself and another member were both excellent at like adapting, and like we can play any of those like sensitive characters, whether it be female, flamboyant, or just a regular guy. It's like it's just one of our skill sets that you never know what you're going to get with a suggestion. Like it's just
Right.
easier to go with it. But when it comes to like wanting to stifle a group and their creativity, it just kind of feels against what improv is, kind of as an art form.
Yeah,
Actually,
absolutely.
most comedy, I would say too. Like
Right.
if you're not punching down, then I don't think it's any real issue.
Well, and also it's like, what are you going to do? You know, the audience member gives you a suggestion and it involves a female, and you're going to then tell the audience member, sorry, I can't do what you just suggested because there's no women here and we can't play women. Right? Like,
Exactly.
is that like that's yeah. And I think so it's weird because as a female involved in comedy, I recognize that there is a lack of women presence in improv and in stand up. So I can see how that would be like a sensitive subject, but also as a professional instructor whose job it is to teach people the fundamentals of comedy, that attitude, the fact that it stifled the entire class and the fact that it stifled creativity and that it literally put a damper and it put a hindrance on your ability to learn in that class, that's where it's too far. It's one thing as a teacher, you always put the note in there that's like, hey, by the way, if there's a woman on your team and they can play the woman in that moment, go for it, right? They could have said that. I don't even agree
Yeah.
with that. I don't agree with that statement, but they could have taken that moment and just been like, hey, we have some women off to the side here, why don't they play the women? Boom, that lesson, right? Instead of making the entire 8-week process about gender norms when that shouldn't be what it's about, if that makes sense. And maybe I'm going to get a lot
Yeah.
of hate for that, or people be like, stay in your lane or whatever. But
No, I mean, no, I get it. I don't think it's anything like the whole stay in your lane. I mean, I felt like maybe it felt like it was being nudged towards that, but I
right.
think it was just more like sheer fear of offending someone. But I
Yeah.
think it's
But it's
also that point where it was like a later class. So it's like by that point, I feel most of us already understand the fundamentals. And
right.
like a lot of these are people who, I don't want to feel like, I'm pandering, but like they have a good head on their shoulders, so they
Right.
know the difference between, making fun of someone or not. But ultimately, it's like when improv, you're dealt the hand you're dealt with. Like my team has two guys on stage, and then we're given an excessively female suggestion where it's like, oh, mother daughter.
Right.
Well, we're gonna do mother daughter. Like we have
Right.
no choice. Like
Right. And if you played the scene like, derpa derpa derp, all we do is cook and clean because we're like I could see how the teacher would be like, whoa, you guys were so creative, and then when you get to the woman scenes, all you do is talk about cooking. What the fuck? But I don't know. See, I'm awful because I would find that funny. Like if I said, I'm
I mean,
sorry,
I think it's like a subversion. Like if you're
I lose my
subverting
woman
what people
card.
would expect, then it would be hilarious.
Yeah,
Like
I lose my woman card because to me, if you were like mother daughter and immediately you both just like got on your hands and knees and started cleaning, I would laugh my ass off. But that's why I don't teach
yeah,
improv. That's
I
why
mean,
they
I had a scene with like my group, and one of my friends was basically the character he got was to be like a really misogynistic pig. So
right. Like, what are you
he
gonna
had
do?
to do that in front of like one of our female cast members, and there was like humor in the moment because you could tell that she knew it was a joke, but she
But
had to get
still, just
really
like,
offended.
yeah,
And then
that
he's really trying to toy the line, wanting to like annoy her for the sake of comedy. But he apologized to her after. But it's one of those things where it's like, too, when you perform with people, you know when it's genuine, you know when it's
right.
like
That's part of
wrong.
getting to know your ensemble
Yeah,
and like forming that bond. So improv is 100% audience based, right? Or like 99.999% audience based.
pretty
It's
much.
all
Yeah,
about like if people don't show up and give you suggestions, that negates the entire purpose. So That being said, what is doing improv like in the time of COVID? Can you even do improv in the time of COVID with Zoom and virtual stuff and theaters closing down?
You can do improv. A lot of it is very, you have to adapt to the new medium.
Okay. So what's
So
that
a
like?
lot of, yeah. So for instance, improv, people, I mean, for those who aren't aware, there's a lot of like object work, like, using your hands. Like if you're holding a gun, you don't want to do it like that. You want to like form the shape of the gun, make it seem kind of
So
realistic, give
like
it some heft, some weight. Same thing
interesting.
with like a beer bottle. You don't want to be like, I'm holding beer. You want to give it the form. Like you want to give it the physical space it needs to kind of help the scene project forward. But physicality is a lot difficult to do online because unless you're standing, and even then, like if I stand, like no one's probably going to see me because like some people have like cramped rooms and all that. So I feel like improv has kind of evolved into a more character based, like facial, kind of emotive form than what it was before.
So more shoulders up as opposed to the
Yeah.
physicality. So uh, I have kind of like a twofer here. Would you say that's better, worse, or just entirely different? And then two, are there any brand new skills that you now have to learn for virtual improv that you would say, for example, you were going to teach a virtual improv class that are brand new skills that you now need to have for virtual improv as opposed to regular improv?
I will say a lot of it is, I would say, a closer reliance on acting. Like you have to be more emotive. You have to be more able to convey beyond just like body physicality because most of the time they're not going to see it. A lot of it is more what you can say and how to convey it rather than just showing off what you can like do with your hands. And I will say, like, in the whole current COVID situation, a lot of the skills I had around physicality have kind of gone downhill. But I'm also slightly biased because I actually prefer the more kind of dramatic, over the top, expressive improv because I felt like that was always one of the strengths for my characters. Because my team, for instance, one of our favorite games was to do Oscar winning moment, which for those who don't know, usually ends with like a monologue, as in your Oscar winning moment, where you're just like overacting on purpose to like deliver this over the top like reaction to something. But now things like Zoom shows makes it more reliant to have those skills that you can talk, but not just endlessly talk, but there's like cohesion to what you're saying to prevent it from like rambling because previously you could always get tagged in by your partner, but now it's a lot harder because your partner isn't there physically, so you can't really be aware where they are in your peripheral. They can't
Yeah.
touch you to tap you to tag out or
Yeah. Which
anything like
means
that.
bringing people into scenes and out of scenes, right? Like you would literally physically tag them, like
Yeah,
heads up, 7 Up style.
the shows I've seen now and done on COVID, it's like basically you just shut off your camera. That's your like tag out.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I actually think that sounds really cool, like aesthetically pleasing, being able to just like turn off everybody else and do your that's cool. Cuz I know in real life improv they're either standing at the back or they've got their backs to the audience, but just like spotlighting the two people, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's one of the best things I feel like that has happened to it is that it makes those two-person scenes a lot
That sounds like very
easier.
visually appealing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it with Zoom is pretty adaptable to an extent, so you can kind of make it easier to portray. It does get a bit messy when you're like interacting with a lot more people.
Yeah.
So I feel like it does also put more pressure on who you're performing with and how well you can kind of mind meld with your teammates
Yeah.
because it's a little more precarious online because if you screw up, it's a lot harder to recover because it's like you have that extra barrier of technology like blocking you from doing certain things,
Right.
and it's a lot more trusting of who you're performing with. So I will say it's harder to an extent, but in a way it's slightly more rewarding now.
Interesting. Oh man, the idea of improv getting harder because so the stand-up comics like to say improv is harder because stand-up comedians get to prepare for stuff ahead of time. I feel like improvisers often say stand-up is harder because stand-up comedians are alone on stage and like all eyes on them as opposed to with like their ensemble. um so that it's interesting that you're like it's even harder but more rewarding, like it's more difficult but the payoff is even better. That's so interesting. Do you think that Zoom improv is only a quarantine thing? Or do you see in the future, and this goes for other kinds of comedy as well in theater, do you see a future where there will always be virtual stand up and real stand up, virtual improv and real improv, virtual theater and real? Do you think that's a thing that's going to be sustainable?
I feel like virtual improv will be sustainable, but not to probably the popularity that it is now.
Mhm.
Because I feel like a lot of the thrill and the excitement of seeing an improv show is just being there in the moment, because no show you ever see will be the same twice. And you kind of lose a little bit of that sparkle and that luster just performing it online, because online you kind of miss that same presence and your scenes are kind of limited. Like you can't do any real physicality. You can't do any scenes where like you're doing any funny kind of slapstick style humor because
Right.
you're, apart from your teammates. And a lot of the character roles now are more focused on the nuances of how you talk, how you portray yourself. And for people who aren't that strong in those skill sets, they're the ones who are going to suffer and probably just immediately go back to in-person improv as soon as they can.
Hmm.
So I feel like there's going to be a place for virtual improv, but it probably won't be to the extent that other like comedy forms like stand up and like anything else has like found its own groove and be able to like permanently carve it out.
Um, do you notice a difference in virtual showcases the lack of like alcohol lubrication? Because for example, at Second City, when you're watching an improv show, you're getting beer and liquor delivered to your table by a waitress, right? And beforehand, there's a bar right next door, and you pregame. Do you find that, or have you ever noticed a difference there in like a sober virtual audience? Unless maybe they're drinking at home, and I've never seen an improv show online. But have you noticed a difference there
I mean,
necessarily?
I feel like improv is also really ingrained with the alcoholism.
It really
like
is. Maybe
like
they're
more
just
so
by
than like
nature,
stand up. Yeah, like
they're already drunk just because they're improvisers and improv fans. Like
yeah,
that
like
hasn't
stand up you
changed
can
at all.
enjoy it if you just go somewhere that won't serve liquor. I mean, you're probably gonna go somewhere with like a 2 drink minimum, and then you're like, I don't want to pay $10 for a Coke. But I mean, when it comes to improv, I feel a lot of it is people's nerves when it comes to wanting to shout out something on stage. Because I've noticed with like a lot of the crowds when I perform, they're afraid to say something
Yeah.
initially. They're like, oh no, what should I say? Is my suggestion going to be viewed as stupid? Is it like a bad suggestion? People
Is
usually have that in their heads when they get started watching an improv show, but it disappears throughout the night. And I hate to say it, that alcohol helps a little bit.
Yeah, has that changed with Zoom at all? Do people bring like drinks to Zoom shows? Do they shout out more on Zoom? Are they quieter? How's that? Like,
I've seen all types of shows on Zoom.
mhm.
The one I performed was actually like really small audience and people just like typed it out, which was
That's smart.
okay.
Yeah.
Like it's easier because you can make sure that your suggestion is read.
Yeah.
Harder because there are some like Zoom issues, like for instance, not getting messages. Like I had that issue where
Oh.
someone went with a suggestion that I couldn't see, so I was kind of like blindsided until the
Yeah.
scene started going, and I had to kind of react, like fumble and react until like a little bit behind because I
Wow.
wasn't sure who pulled that suggestion out of where, what exactly
Or if they just like
was.
made it up. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Interesting. In
in a
the future,
way, yeah, Zoom can create like technical issues too,
yeah.
but
Like there's no such thing as a glitch in real life improv or bad connection in real life improv. You don't need Wi-Fi in real life improv.
yeah, that'll just become a funny moment.
Yeah, yeah. Um, would you personally continue doing Zoom improv in the future if you had to pick? So like say there's a Thursday night and you've got a live opportunity and you've got a Zoom opportunity. They both have like 20 people, 30 people in attendance. Would you still pick the live one over the Zoom one?
I would still pick the live one over the Zoom one.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't done anywhere near as much Zoom improv as I have as like live improv.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's largely because both myself and like for instance my team, like we just immediately decided to go on hiatus once the quarantine got worse. But
Yeah, for sure.
for me, I've dabbled with other performers and all that, but it's not something that it's unique and it has like parts that I like, but I truly miss the live reaction, the
Yeah.
performance.
It's kind of like out of necessity instead of out of like love for the Zoom craft kind of thing.
Exactly.
It's
Like
more
you're
like I just don't want to get
performing.
rusty.
Yeah, you're performing right now. Like for me, if I perform improv, it's because I don't want to get rusty,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
it's because I want to just like do something different. But for me, I mean, it's been great because I've been able to focus more on like stand up and things like I wanted to do on the side and pursue. But with improv, as much as I love it, I feel it's better personally in person, and it kind of hopefully when everything goes back to normal, we'll be able to bounce back. But I mean, we'll see. But I feel like it has that benefit of it's just easier and better in person for most
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, for sure. We have another question here in the chat. The question is, good question. I really like this one. Man, I'm mad that I didn't think to ask you this one first. What is the biggest misconception people have about improv?
Ooh, that's
That's a
actually a
good
really good
one.
one.
Yeah, that's
That's
like
really
I
good.
should have had that one. You know what? I'm just gonna let him host the chat from now on because he's asking all the good questions.
Yeah, that was a great question. I feel like the biggest misconception about improv is that everyone and their friends will be like, "Come see my improv show." It's like you have those like performers that are constantly like nagging you, "Hey, come see my improv show," and I've purposefully tried to avoid becoming one of those people
Yo.
because I'll be honest, starting off with improv, you're really going to rely on your friends a lot.
Yeah.
People you know.
It's like joining an MLM.
Yeah.
Hey,
If
you
you
want
have
to buy
someone who
some
loves
improv?
improv, great. If you have someone who doesn't and they're obligated to go, you're really in like treacherous waters here.
You get to ask them like maybe two times.
I mean, I'm lucky in the sense that my team, we can like pack shows because we know enough people and we have like a dedicated fan base
Yeah.
of
And you
people
guys
who love
do
to
really
see us
well.
perform.
And you get
Yeah,
extended constantly.
yeah. So we have that like benefit. But for me, a lot of it is when I first started performing with my friends, I hated wanting to invite them because obviously when you're doing like C, D, E shows, like second C, it's like, oh yeah, you gotta like invite your friends to come see. And I'm like, oh God, no.
Yeah, I was about to say I feel like with comedy the steps are when you first begin you're like I want everyone to come to my shows, and then when you've been doing it for a long time you're like I swear to God if somebody I know shows up to one of my shows I'm going to be so pissed. Like I don't want
Yeah.
anybody I know at
Yeah.
any of these shows.
And it doesn't help that there's this stigma of the weird come see my show improv people where they're all
Yeah,
like wacky and quirky. Like
they've
I
all
actually
got
have
like Coke bottle glasses and the
yeah,
Hawaiian shirt.
oh man, I have a friend who so he performs live music, right? And obviously we were talking about like different like types of people one time. So one time he was taking an Uber from like a gig he did, and then his Uber driver is like, "Oh, where are you going to?" He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go see a buddy. He's performing over at like Second City right now." So he was coming to my show, and then like the Uber driver was like, "I perform improv too. You should come see my show."
And you're
He's like,
like,
"Oh, oh, oh,
no,
no." He's like, "No, no. I'm
no.
like, I'm already going to a show. It's fine." And then the guy's really pushing, I'm performing this at IO, and he just kept trying to give him like an invite.
No.
And he's like, "Man, it was just one of those pushy improv people." And it's like, I've never wanted to be that. So I'm like apologizing to him. I'm like, "No, no, you don't ever have to go to my show." He's like, "No, I go to your show because I love them. They're funny."
Yeah, it's pushy. I feel like comedy people in general, like even though
Yeah.
the stereotype is the improviser, I feel like especially in the very beginning of their careers, comedians in general are just very pushy. Performers in general, like actors, are just so pushy. So that guy probably took like level 1 or what, I don't know what they had at IO.
Yeah.
Oh man, that hurts to say. Ugh.
Yeah, it's one of those like cringe moments where it's like you feel the cringe hearing that story, and I'm like, no, I never want to be that way. I want people to like come and
Yep.
see me because they want to come and see me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been fortunate, knock on wood, that everyone likes her shows, and
Yeah, and you guys are so good. Like, you
I
guys are
appreciate
really,
that.
really good. Yeah, like, I remember I came to one of your shows once, and, like, primarily to be supportive, right?
Yeah,
Because, I teach stand-up. I hadn't seen an improv show in a very long time. Um, and you guys were really good. Like, I did not go expecting you to not be good because I'd already heard that your team got extended, that you guys were always busy. Um, I remember in class you would just be like, yeah, like tomorrow I've got this, and then Thursday we've got that, and then Friday we've got that. Like, I knew you guys were going to be good. Um, I guess I just didn't realize how much I personally was just going to enjoy it. And you guys did a fabulous job. That was the day that I ripped my contact. So I was like,
oh yeah, I remember that.
hold on.
I was like
Yeah.
afraid because I'm like, oh no, is there like,
Yeah. I was just sitting there like,
is she giving us like a message? Like,
no, I was just blind. I just couldn't see shit.
yeah,
Um, so, but we've got another question in the chat, but I just want to tell you the worst exchange I ever had with somebody who was an improviser. Um, so I went to a friend's show, their improv show, and it was great. It was
yeah,
at Annoyance, and which, contrary to popular belief, it was not annoying. It was a great show. So we go out to a bar afterward to hang out, and their teacher was there, the person who had taught them. And he walks in, and first of all, I don't care if people know who I'm talking about by describing this. First of all, he has a handlebar mustache that's waxed like that, right? Like Salvador Dali
oh my god, I
handlebar
think I know the
mustache.
guy.
And he's got like these little bitty Coke bottle glasses. But the reason I noticed him was because he started wearing this, like, the only way I can describe it is like a Mulan type Japanese mask. Like, and I said Mulan as in like there's
Yeah.
one in the movie. I'm not trying to be like racist. Like, the Mulan kind. Literally, I can remember there was a mask in Mulan that looked just
Okay.
like
Well, I
it.
was worried it's gonna be the Q&A that gets Sydney canceled.
No, the mask that Mushu has before it's
Yeah.
revealed that he's like, that's what it looked like. And this guy just like put it on, and he was just standing there, and nobody was talking to him, and it was like, clearly he was trying to get attention and nobody was paying attention to this guy, and it was really, really painful to watch. So finally I go over to him and I'm like, hey man, like, what's going on? I loved the show that you guys did. I heard you were their teacher. Great work. It's trying to be nice from one teacher to the next.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, and he like brags out himself for like a second, and I just let him because they had a great show. It was a good night. We're celebrating them. And then he was like, so what do you do? And I was like, oh, I do stand up, and I do stand up, and I do stand up. And Brian, this guy, dead serious, this guy's like, yeah. He's like, I thought about doing stand up for a while, and I wish this impersonation was an exaggeration, but he was literally this caricature of a cocky person. He goes, yeah, I thought about doing stand up for a while, but then I realized like it really wouldn't be fair for me to do stand up. And I was like, oh, why is that? And he goes, because I would just be like so good at it. I would just be such a good stand up comedian that honestly, like, I need to stick with something that's more challenging. And I was like, Really? And he's like, yeah. Because, it just wouldn't be hard. And I really want to challenge myself. So that's why I don't do stand up. But like, have fun. And I have thought about that guy probably once a day for 5 or 6 years now. And
I don't blame you.
I
I mean, he
really
seems a
want to
lot like a
know
certain someone in office right now.
I really want to know what he's doing now. And I think it's hilarious that I don't know. So clearly, what he's doing is not so big and so fantastical and so famous that I already know. And I wish I remembered his name. I don't know his name. So if you were like, is that so and so? I wouldn't be able to tell you because I don't
I don't
remember.
know. I feel like I've seen him before.
But what I described is like everybody, though, at the
Yeah,
same
you know
time.
you do. Like I feel like there's like specific like aspects of them that don't like
Yeah.
that stick out, like the guy with a mask or the guy with a pipe who like pull
Yeah.
it out after a
Or the
show
guy
when
with the
he's like at a bar.
ukulele.
Yeah, it's like they all have like a gimmick.
Right. They all have like a shtick thing. I would recognize him immediately if I saw him, but the only reason I described him was because I know I'm describing 950,000 people involved in comedy, so it's like a little bit
Yeah.
safe. But I remember he found out I was a stand-up comedian, and that's when he was like, "Yeah, but like, good luck to you and all that. But I just want something that's gonna like challenge me." And I was infuriated. I was like, "This is why nobody's talking to you." You're like, because I tried to compliment you, but anyway, so we have a question. We have a question in the chat. Oh, this is an interesting one. I'm curious what you'll have to say about it. He says, do you find a major difference between improv classes offered in Chicago versus improv classes offered in the suburbs of Chicago? Have you ever taken any suburb classes or?
So I never took a class in the suburbs, but I did take a class over online in Seattle actually.
Oh, that's cool.
So I mean, hopefully I can answer this as great as you can, as great as I can, because I mean, I'm not trying to say that Chicago's so different from our suburbs that it's like you're
Right.
in another state, but you can definitely tell like certain aspects of different styles. Like I felt like the people I performed with in that class were very focused on wanting to make themselves more known in a scene. So they're more prone to saying bigger, like more boisterous things to kind of draw attention to them. But
Hmm.
I also noticed that I don't know if it was like a significant gap in experience because I was kind of taking it as like a, hey, I haven't performed in like a couple of months. Let me, kind of, shake some of the rust off. But you could tell that these are people who were kind of really trying to make themselves known, and it was like everyone in that class, like to the point that like I was asking them, I'm like, oh, are you guys like new or something? Because I'm like, they're like, no, we've performed here for years or whatever, and like some of them had more experience than I did. But I don't know if it's like there's a specific scene in like Seattle that like runs differently, but they were all sort of very selfish when it comes to scenes.
Hmm.
So I don't know if it was just like you have to really make yourself known to stick out.
Like fight a lot harder kind of thing.
Yeah, like you really have to make yourself known. However, you could tell that like when it came to bouncing back and forth with interactions, you can make them stumble by just, yes, ending the scene and just going with your suggestions, where I think they were just expecting people to drop certain ideas. I mean, I know there's like the whole improv concept of yes and, but generally, like you never want to say something that you won't ever bring back.
Right. Right. And why is that? Why would you? I mean, I know, but I'm curious, like if somebody didn't know why that is.
Generally, because sometimes you can like bring up something funny, like a non sequitur, but there's also like humor in like
Like a callback.
callbacks and like just making something into a recurring joke. Like you could use it as like a branching off point for a new scene. There's all these things that you can use with just something as simple as someone saying like a what you'd assume to be like a red herring in literature, where someone said, "Oh, hey, my dog is brown," but and then just go on something words, and then you're just doing a bunch of scenes about like brown dogs or like a really brown hot dog, or there's like a million other things you can do.
Yeah, or like somebody takes a bite and they're like, "Is this made out of pure peanut butter?" And the person's like, "Yeah, my grandma, she thinks she's a good cook, but she literally only uses peanut butter." And then like 3 scenes later, somebody takes a bite out of their burger and they're like, "Why does my burger taste like peanut butter?" Right? And like the scene moves on, but you've
Yeah.
still got that like callback. And then at the very
Yeah.
end, maybe somebody's like, oh, thank God, my Starbucks. And they take a drink and they're like, why is this just a cup full of peanut butter?
Yeah, yeah, it's like that's the beauty of like callbacks, but these were people who were kind of get like tripped up, and I think they were just used to maybe having scenes go their way, and for me, it was like a different style because actually someone joined later on who took classes here in Chicago. They noticed that I had a better rapport with him because I guess maybe there are some like regional differences to improv that like
That's interesting. I
I'm
know there is in
sure.
stand up, so that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm sure that there's like some more specific styles. Like for me, I think it was also like they kind of thought that I was very weird because a lot of my scenes were very like dark, but I was also getting like really dark suggestions, so I would like go all out on it. Like I'm
That's cool.
posting all these like morality questions, and people are like really impressed with me. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm just like I'm not that depressed, please.
Can I get can I get a suggestion for a place? Uh, the abyss that is reality.
Yeah,
Like,
the abyss that is my soul.
yeah. Well, so we're coming down to the last couple of minutes. And so I was curious if, say, for example, somebody just now logged on or just now like skipped to the end of the video or something like that. If you wanted somebody who is just getting started in improv or had been thinking about getting started in improv, maybe hasn't yet, if you wanted them to walk away with maybe three pieces of advice or ideas or things to expect, what would be like three granules that you would give somebody that you hope they would remember from this video or that they would walk away with?
Okay, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's probably the ones I said earlier, but I'll try
You're
try to
like, bitch,
reiterate them.
you asked me this question and I answered it.
Yeah. First off, just remember that improv is a collaborative experience.
Mm.
So check your ego at the door. Like, there's nothing
Ooh,
wrong with having an ego, but
right.
the sooner you can let it go and be content with just being like a background character until it's your time to shine, or just like a straight man, the more fun you'll have and the better your scenes will be.
That's awesome. And when he
Um,
says straight man, for those of you who don't know, he doesn't mean literally be a straight man. He means be the not kooky character. Just throwing,
yeah,
in case there's somebody watching this going, why do they keep telling me to be a straight man?
yeah. I'm sorry. That's not something I'm trying to encourage. You know, don't check your sexuality at the door when you're performing improv. Embrace it. Um, yeah, that's one of them. Another one I would probably give them is don't be afraid of failing. Like it's one of those things
Ooh.
where it's harder than it appears to be. So if you're performing and you're like, I wasn't good, I didn't understand it, I didn't feel like I got along well with my scene partner, that's perfectly normal. Like there's plenty of times when honestly, maybe you were just not feeling a suggestion, maybe you're having an off day, or honestly, there's plenty of people who you're never going to perform with and click. Like you're just never going to have any chemistry with that person.
Mhm.
It's perfectly normal. And honestly, you just roll with the punches. And as you kind of dabble more in it, you'll sort of understand why that is and what you can do to work on it. But it's something that I know a lot of new improvisers get frustrated with. And now I did too, where I'm like, I don't feel like I'm really clicking well. And it was just simply, honestly, I didn't really perform that well with like these people. And then I did something different. Like I took a class later on, and then I'm like, okay, I gelled perfectly to the point that these people became my regular like group mates. Like you just meet some people who, no matter what, you're never gonna perform well in, and others that you're gonna make magic with. So don't be frustrated if you don't find them. There's people are out there.
Yeah. It's live comedy. Stuff
Yeah.
happens. It's not going to be perfect every single time. Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, for answering our questions, for allowing us to kind of pepper you with, and they kind of came, I know they were all over the place. It was like performance questions, ensemble questions, location questions, but you really just rolled with the punches. And I think that comes with improv. I think that's part of your improv skills. And we have people saying thank you so much in the comments for your time and your effort and your service.